So, welcome to another KAP podcast. And I was reflecting the other day on these podcasts and my life as a politician. You get to meet some fascinating people. And I guess I've had the advantage of having my father wandering around, collecting a lot of contacts, and you get access to some real leaders and champions of industry. And I want to share that with a lot of people out there. And I had to put high up the rankings Stuart Ballantyne. I always find it sometimes difficult to explain people because the resume doesn't do it justice. And I'm going to have a bit of a go here, Stuart, but you were former CEO, now chairman of Seatransport Corporation. I've been in your big office there at the Gold Coast, specialising in naval architecture, logistics and surveying, but you spent a lot of life at sea. And and I'm not going to read too much of the rest. I want you to explain it. We'll come back to it, but welcome and thanks for being on the show here, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Robbie. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so can you go through a little bit of your background, and then we'll get into how that where that's landed you now.
Well, this is interesting. Well, look, I keep saying to people, I'm just a dumbass sailor, and I spent just over 7 years at sea, but I was trained in seamanship. I was trained in stability, navigation, ship construction, all that sort of stuff. But I was trained to actually look around and look ahead as a navigating officer. Right. I was trained to look at and to weigh all of the pros and cons of the situation.
Yep.
So, and the best leaders I've come across in my life are guys that were trained in that way. Farmers are another good example because they have to think about the weather. They have to think about the seeding,
the
outcomes
water, are very real, aren't they? If you make the wrong decision, the outcomes can be very dire.
Absolutely, and you've got to stay away from difficulties, stay away from storms, or you got to learn how to handle storms.
Yep.
And I've done a couple of videos on storms of life, how to handle that.
Yep.
And so I can I've sent some of those around, but it's a very real thing. When I started my own company here in Queensland, 1976, I was just a baby. When Joe Ballantyne was here, and I came here because I was so impressed with Joe Ballantyne. I was 29 years old. And I thought, wow, this guy has got this place rocking and rolling. And he was a guy that made decisions. If it was good for Queensland and good for your industry, he would support it.
Yep.
If it wasn't good for Queensland and not good for your industry, he would oppose it. And I like that simple sailor, simple farmer type thinking, and we can't seem to find that anymore. Everything's woke and, you can't upset this person and that person. So that's what I do. I design ships. We've sold out of ship designs to 47 countries. I put out a recent YouTube explaining to Greta and other people like that the sea is not rising because when we design these ferries and things like that, the ramp must come to the tangent point above the mean sea level. And I can tell you after checking 47 countries, the mean sea level has marginally changed up and marginally changed down in some places. We were talking only millimeters.
Yep.
And despite the computer predictions, I don't know why they're trying to hoodwink us, but it's not true. Anyone wants to see that, I'm happy to send it on to Matt.
So you haven't landed the you're on the Christmas card list from Greta Thunberg?
No, I at the end of my last little 2.5 minute video, I told her that as the Swedes are not up to it, that she should go and find herself a big hairy Norwegian boyfriend and go up the mountain for a weekend and get a smile on her face and an end to this negative blah 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 crap that she keeps coming out with.
I've watched a lot of your videos and seen you on TV before. You've walked the halls of power before and different committees. You were on one of the advisory committees on the dredging, Stuart, weren't you, in Brisbane River?
Yes, that's right. I was called in as a consultant in 1996. But it was a done deal with the Greens and the Labor government. Yes, it was a done deal, and I just walked in there like a lamb to the slaughter. And
that was about stopping dredging in the Brisbane River.
Yes, that's right. It was Jim Surley and a couple of the evil Green people. But there was a big heap there. The Mount Cosby State School was Melbourne Cup Day. I remember it well. And it was just a total ambush because they wanted to see the river blue, the Brisbane River. They wanted to see it blue. They didn't want to see it browny color.
It's a nice
and
sentiment.
of course I say, well, look, please don't do this because to replace two old, very quiet, the ugly Brisbane dredges, but they're very quiet, with 160 truck movements a day in through the burbs, to me didn't make any sense. With kids and grandkids, I don't want to see trucks on the road. I prefer to see trucks off the road and keep everything on the water.
Yep.
But and I said, but the second main thing is that if you stop the dredging, it'll stop the navigation capability of the river, and it will exacerbate flood risks. And 15 years later, in 2011, massive flood, and 38 people killed. And I sent my little report into the inquiry, and I think they must have just shoved it under the table.
Wouldn't have been convenient.
For them. It wasn't convenient. But the other interesting thing, Robbie, is that the fact that, the inland rail, this is, the big silver bullet for us, East Coast transportation, the inland rail from Melbourne to Brisbane is coming through to Acacia Ridge. And all the clever people then have said, well, we'll barge it from Acacia Ridge down the river. And of course, that used to be possible before 1996, because we used to be able to barge the coal from the Bremer River intersection with the Brisbane River all the way down to the port. But of course, as soon as you stopped dredging, you couldn't navigate. You lost the navigation capability of the river. So now they're sitting thinking, scratching their heads, how are we going to get all these containers from Acacia Ridge down to the port of Brisbane? Do we need tunnels, bridges? The best action was, of course, the Brisbane River with the barges, but that's gone. Unless they recommence dredging of the river, and up to that stage, Brisbane was the cheapest place in the country because of the source of sand and aggregate. That's why Pioneer and Boral were here, because they were.
I was going to ask you about this because
making bricks, concrete, pavers, tiles, etc., etc. So it was the cheapest place in the country. Now it's not.
Yeah, so it had a massive impact on the cost of building, perhaps in Queensland, but certainly in Brisbane, because you had that cheap material you were getting out of the river, and that's gone. So subsequently, you had more expensive building material costs, and there's always an impact on these decisions, and no one goes to revisit it. No one ever brings it up retrospectively, measures it, and they just keep making decisions. They keep making the same mistakes in all other areas. But you saw that firsthand what happened there, and I think everyone. I'm not sure people ever quantified. I think that building construction in costs increase was an interesting. I don't think anyone ever factored that in, but it's pretty easy to. I think you don't have to think about it too long to see the evidence on the flooding and what that impact did from. And I mean, it's just common sense. If you've got a nice big channel for the water to go out on, and you get rid of that. That's very interesting. So the other,
but that's the same for all of the Queensland rivers, Robbie. Because I mean, even up at Innisfail, in the Johnson River,
Marillion Harbour,
you have a look at the history of the trading ships up and down the coast.
Yeah.
I mean, the used to have reasonable sized cargo ships going actually all the way up to Innisfail. But since they had this, it's almost like dredging was demonized by the Greens and Labour.
Yep.
And no, we can't have it. It's evil. We don't do that sort of thing. We don't do live exports. We don't do coal. We don't do all this messy stuff. And it's just absolute idiocy of the worst order.
There's so many mistruths peddled around the dredging spoil, and it's ruining the reef, and it's just nonsense. There's so much rubbish. So I said there's a ship there behind you in the picture. Tell us about that.
Well, that's the ship I did my time on. I came to Australia when I was 14.
Yep.
I was number 3 of 6 kids Number 3 is great to be because they can never remember your name. And so it's at 16, I bolted. I was the first one to leave the house. I went off to sea, and that's the ship I went on.
Yep.
I was a cadet on that ship, and it was running between Geelong, Melbourne, Nauru, Ocean Island. It was picking up phosphate, taking up passengers, taking the fuel.
Yep.
So occasionally down to New Zealand, occasionally around to Christmas Island. It was a fantastic ship.
And then I've seen in your offices before a big model of the Winmar, which I know very well because up in a remote area of the world that I live in, we've got the Century Mine that carts zinc, and it goes about 100 kilometres, 200 kilometre pipeline of slurry that goes to a ship and goes out to sea, and it's transported via a boat called the Winmar. So everyone in the Gulf knows the Winmar, and that was a boat that you guys built.
Yeah, we designed it, and we designed and supervised the building, and the pipeline was 303. I always remember a 303. It's a 303-mile pipeline, slurry pipeline. It was the longest one in Australia.
How long? I should know this. How long is it?
303.
Yeah, right.
303 kilometres.
I was way off, yeah.
Just remember the gun.
Yeah. Yep, and that's iconic. And then the MacArthur River port, you were involved with that?
Yeah, we did that one. That was back in, I did the study
Territory.
Back in the late 80s. And now that little place was, you and I have shared before, even when we were interviewed on the ABC that time. That little port has exported, I think it's $11.5 billion worth of commodities, and the governments have got, I think it's 800 million in royalties. I mean, it's
paid for a lot of schools and hospitals.
Yes, that's exactly right, and it's a tiny little harbour.
Yeah, it is.
Half the size of a small marina.
Yeah.
But then Palaszczuk and her fellow idiots say, well, we're going to have a Sustainable Ports Act in Queensland because we own the 10 trading ports in the 7,000 kilometres of Queensland coast, and we don't want anyone else to compete with them. So they passed this Sustainable Ports Act 3 years ago.
I was there.
That nobody else could build a port, and we've been trying to do similar things right around Queensland. Great for regional development, great for youth training, Aboriginal opportunities.
Yeah.
It was,
I want to talk a lot more about that. I love some of the ideas you've got on that. Tell me, can you just tell us a bit about, there was an opportunity down in South Australia, you were presented with a problem there, and I thought that was an interesting story, what happened down there.
Well, the most valuable, the best quality grain in the country comes from the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia. Mm-hmm. And we had set up a small ferry operation there, first of all. And then once the ferry was in, we had a little trading port, if you like. So the farmers came and said, "Oh, can we export there? Because for us to take the grain all the way down to Port Lincoln, if we take it out of here on a transshipment thing like you're doing in Bing Bong and we're doing it at Karumba, this will save us $25 a ton at the farm gate." And of course, that area generates up to 2 million tons. This is a lot of money we can save.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we started that little port. We started exporting 2 years ago. We're up to 600,000 tons out of that tiny little place called Lucky Bay. If anyone wants to look at that, just Google Earth and Lucky Bay, and you'll see it there.
It's a very discreet.
Lucky Air.
It's a very discreet environmental footprint, like for the amount of wealth that goes out. Very small area, low environmental impact. No one could complain about it.
That's right. Well, they did. The Greens, of course, they're everywhere, and the EPA was moaning and groaning. And even though the ferry company had already taken all the trucks off the road, which was a good thing, but they like to have a whinge and a moan. But we're now the largest employer within 100 kilometres of there. Yeah. And our biggest problem now is getting accommodation because people don't want to fly in, fly out anymore. So we just went through the slow process of getting a development application approved for some accommodation there because it's a nice area. Beachfront. Fantastic.
Yeah. So you've sort of spoken a lot how there's large road and rail networks in Australia, and we've got in the shipping, but compared to other parts of the world, they've got canals and multiple ports, and like per kilometre of coastline, Australia's has an enormous deficit of infrastructure, like sea infrastructure, just like that one you built at South Australia. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in fact, it was Corey Bernardi that interviewed me on January the 4th this year to respond to Albanese's proclamation he was going to build 12 coastal ships. So Corey got me on as our special guest tonight to respond to this issue. Is Dr. Stuart Ballantyne. Good evening, Stuart. I said, good evening, Corey, and Happy New Year, thinking that 4th of January, nobody's going to be listening. And I said, as to your comment, I just love hearing politicians talking a lot of ship. So he immediately cracked up. I said, ship, that's with a P, And I said, but really, Australia doesn't need 12 ships. It needs actually 250 of those in the overseas trades and 150 in the coastal trades. But in terms of the ships, I said, more importantly, we actually need the ports. And if you look at Gujarat in India, which is a little powerhouse, it's one of the smallest states, it has a port every 53 kilometers.
Where's that?
Gujarat in India.
Ah, right, okay.
Gujarat.
Yep.
So small. It's a small state in India, but it's the state with the highest GDP in India. So it's a real powerhouse of activity. They've got a port every 53 kilometers.
Like a bigger version of Karumba. Karumba's a little powerhouse in Queensland, but no one knows where it is.
Well, but then UK has a trading port every 65 kilometers. In Queensland, we have a trading port on average, every 700 kilometers. Wow. So when the Defense Department put their hands up and say, well, we haven't got anywhere to actually berth our patrol boats, and the fishing industry is saying, well, we've got to do transshipping in the middle of the Gulf to motherships with our catch and get back fuel, because there's no ports to go to. There should be ports every 50 to 60 kilometers.
It's nuts.
Even just tiny ports or marinas or something, but...
I was just at a field day here in North Queensland, the North Queensland Field Days, and we're talking about the expansion of farming on the Midwest Plains, millions of acres of black soil plains that can quite easily turn into a Murray-Darling or a large, very significant farming agricultural producer for the nation. They're just running cattle on it at the moment, and and all through the Cape. I mean, don't even talk about the Cape. It's like it's back in the dark ages, and economically, and the Labor government here in Queensland just announced they bought another 2 national parks to lock up more of the Cape. But the amount of resources we have in the Cape, North Queensland, is just phenomenal. But we've got 1.5, or you might say, the 2 strategic ports, Cairns and Townsville, Marillion. If we're just talking far north, Marillion, Karumba, Weipa. There's barely anything of, and they put the legislation in. I remember talking to you about it very closely at the time to make sure no more ports could be built in Queensland forever. And both sides of Parliament voted for it. I think it was KAP and maybe one of the independents were the only ones voting against it. But it may have been just only KP voting against. We couldn't believe it. And it was all about UNESCO. They said, well, we can't upset UNESCO, Stuart. Can you believe it?
This is just absolute nonsense. In fact, it's quite interesting because I've got a couple of mates that like fishing in tinnies up in North Queensland. And one of them was all incensed that all of a sudden the area where he's fished for 40 years became a sensitive fish habitat. So, and of course, these guys, the EPA, had stuck just a triangular map on a triangle shape on the sea map. And so he went and challenged them on it. And there was no scientific basis. It was just somebody said, okay, well, let's do another bit. And, they're locking the whole place up. They're locking our ability to defend ourselves, to populate the north. As you know, the MTG, this small business think tank that you addressed when you came down,
Yep.
we've put a few YouTubes out and things like that, and we did a poll just in the last 3 weeks as to who are you going to vote for. And they said, we're going to vote for the party that has policies for the nation.
Oh, good.
Policies for the nation.
Yep.
And it's a bit like if I'm designing a ship,
Yep.
and I've got the ship, and if you could imagine Australia as the ship, we've got the ship here.
Okay.
How are we going to power it? The only sensible way of powering this thing is nuclear. And we should be having nuclear power plants right around this nation to power everything that we want to do. Everything, our manufacturing, our defense. We should be having the boomerang line, the Stuart railway across the country with the steel mill either side. We need lots of power for that. We need power for the Bradfield scheme and turn around some of these the waters into the Murray-Darling headwaters. I mean, it's power that when you see what's good for this country, the vision that we need for this country, the base common denominator is power. And the only sensible power without any environmental pollution is nuclear.
Yep. So look, nuclear power, Stuart, right on board. There's amazing opportunities for that, and particularly in the northwest, we're trying to get the transmission line, high voltage transmission line, built from Townsville to Mount Isa, which would enable. Well, there's I think it's the third biggest deposit. Uranium deposit is in only like 50k radius outside of Mount Isa, and you've got all that industry there. Wonderful opportunities there, and you're right. You get the basics like your transport, your water, your industry, your energy. I tell you what though, it's I can say from a politician point of view, because that's the stuff that gets my juices flowing. I really switch on, and I love talking about the nation building stuff and love putting my energy into it. But there's not always a lot of votes in it. I think the public has been so disconnected from that, and they just don't believe the government can do anything, that there's an education process in between. I don't mind because I get not too bad a vote where I am, so I get a bit of latitude to talk about this stuff. And but there's a process there politically, I tell you. Yes.
Well, I think the consensus of, in fact, it was almost unanimous at the MTG. And there was polled 55 of our members, and it was energy was first.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Defence was second, but energy, of course, then tied in with the boomerang line. It tied in with the Bradfield scheme. It tied in with all of the big picture stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas if you listen to some of our fearless leaders, sniping about gender equality and just nonsense.
I'm not sure how that plugs
trivia.
into defence or nation building. But
we have, and I think we're losing it, and I think the average person on the street is actually so disappointed and distrustful of the major politicians.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going sideways a bit on the politics. It's curious to see those the mass protests on the vaccine mandates. Because regardless of what you think of vaccinations, I think the mandate issue started to strike a chord, and I think it hit that artery of discontent that's flowing out there in the Australian public, where they're really angry about, and they can't put their finger on it but things that just don't make sense or ring true. They keep talking about gender fluidity in politics and these sort of things, when I think intuitively they know that we should be talking a bit about defence, and we should be talking a bit about the future and how are you going to create some industry to make sure, I can still have a job in the future. I think they intuitively know that. So I think some of these protests and that real agitation is because there's that pent-up dissatisfaction, and it's being expressed.
There's a level of discontent, and but people they said, in the absence of clear leadership, there's an old saying, people will follow the person making the loudest noise. And then I believe it's now time for leaders to say, listen, you guys, forget all that crap with gender equality and all this nonsense and woke business. We need to get this country back on track. We need to sort out the energy source first, which is uranium. Now, the New South Wales did a bipartisan study last year. They released the results of it. And they said in 39 years, the technology of nuclear had advanced so much, and it was de-risked in terms of radiation and pollution, etc., etc. So they gave it the thumbs up from both sides of politics. Now, we haven't picked up that and ran with it yet as a nation. We've been so busy with, let's go to Glasgow and vote for zero emissions. Man. What an absolute load of nonsense.
Good luck with that.
And our MTG, we protested against the lockdown. In the first month, we put a YouTube out saying, please do not lock down because this is going to cause mental anguish. It's going to cause suicides, home invasions, the whole lot.
Yep.
And that's exactly what's happened. And in hindsight, there was no reason to lock down at all.
We got a paper delivered us from a parliamentary committee last week in Parliament. At the same week, we were debating the end of the extension of powers by the government to enforce things like mandates. And KAP were putting up the amendment against it, and the Premier shut down the debate with still about 10 speakers to go, which meant the alternative side of the debate didn't even get to put up, which was me, didn't even get to put the amendment up for people to even consider. So that was very frustrating. Getting back to the just get back to the ports. Like, we adopted a policy off you that I just thought was inspirational, which is, it's I mean, it is sort of tapping in the nation building, but it was just a sort of a compromising policy on the ports through that Cape York area.
Yes.
And tell us people how you arrived at that, because a lot of we haven't told people that you're a yachty that takes your boat around Australia and takes big trips, and tell us about that initiative there that we'd adopted.
Well, I know you're a farmer, but the fact is, Robbie, that as Hagar the Horrible says, that cartoon character with
I know Hagar well, yeah.
Hagar the Horrible. Hagar says, a man without a boat is not a happy man. So with Stephanie and I took our boat from here on the Gold Coast up to Port Douglas, and on average there's a marina every 35 nautical miles. So it's great. You can do a bit of a day sail and then stop at the next place and have a nice meal ashore, and go up to the good restaurants, and that's why we even snuck in over high tide up to places like Innisfail. It was great.
Yeah.
And but then at Port Douglas, it all stops. There's no marinas until Darwin.
There's a lot of coastline between there and Darwin.
That's right. So and I'm telling you, thousands of boaties. The end of the line is Port Douglas.
Yep.
So we said, well, how about we get some of the small marinas all the way around, populate small marinas right around the north, Cape York,
place like
out to the other Torres Strait Islands.
Yep.
And then, but of course, the government is always suspicious that somebody evil like me might sneak coal out. Such is their level of paranoia about coal, that we tried to get a small harbour for Hopeville Congress, just north of Cooktown.
It's like greeny kryptonite, isn't it, the coal?
Yeah.
They must die when you wave it around the end of them.
It sends them around in a frenzy, and so they said, oh, no, we can't let you do that, put an infrastructure in, because you might sneak coal out of there. I said, well, hang on, Hopeville, there wasn't a coal tenement within 400 kilometres, and that still didn't stop them. And this top people in Garumpa, top people.
Yeah.
And then Queensland, the Queensland government sent 2 directors down to lecture me in my office here about the error of my ways, talking about mini ports and regional expansion and regional opportunities and regional training.
Yeah.
Because one of the great things about how dare you? You know, one of the things that, of course, I got Richie Ahmad and Noel Pearson agreeing. Even if you take the marina philosophy, one of the good things about the indigenous kids all love boats. They love boating, they love fishing, diving, and there's a heap of opportunities. I'm talking about employment opportunities and training. With boats, I mean, you know, where I am, my office has got a little marina there, and that employs probably about 60 or 80 guys there in different aspects. You know, that's only a small marina. It's just opportunities, but Labour and the Greens seem to be anti this or anti anything sensible, anti Australian.
Well, like I said, they bought 2 cattle stations up there, which they won't declare it publicly or say it to, but they'll just shut down everything up there, and they'll turn into carbon farms or something. That is a euphemism for locking it up. And and I mean, most of that country gets ruined. But as soon as they turn it into national park, where it gets ruined, it overgrows with suckers, and they stop. You know, the land management goes to rubbish. So, mate, you know, it's that's not surprising to hear, but it is interesting though. And someone gives such an elegant solution to so many problems up there. I mean, that there's spin-offs with defence and everything. Once you start some activity, some coastal action there, surveillance, everything. I mean, there's barely anyone lives up in these areas. You know, you're not interrupting much, but you've given a presentation. All they can see is progress, and they must stop it. They must stop progress and anything that's got to do that could even possibly have something to do with industry development. We need to stop it.
Yes. Well, here's an interesting thing, Robbie, that I believe you should always copy success. And what Malaysia did in their northern border, just beside a place called Langkawi, about 40 years ago, they said zero tax. Langkawi and the place just across there, Penang. And so immediately they populated the place. Everyone up there because you're not paying any tax. How good is that? So all of a sudden there was buildings, there was motels, hotels, and it's a fantastic tourist destination these days. But it be populated, you know, with such good quality housing. Of course, then they put their border forces, and their border is protected. And one of the things that I've said in one of my columns a long time ago, we should copy success. That's what Malaysia's done. And for north of Cape York, where the most amount of border incursions happen, and I think it's border incursions something like 7,500 a year. According to the border force protection people. Well, okay, all of a sudden there's going to be a huge population and a huge population of police and border people because it's actually a good place to live. At the moment, it is not a good place to live. So.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's there's a lot more to that. You know, building a nation out of, and it's not even to compete with the rail and road, because I was talking to but building the nation to increase our logistical capacity and transport. I was talking in one of the recent podcasts with John Blackburn, who specialises in food security and those sort of things, and it was absolutely scary when you looked at the ownership, the composition of the shipping and the lack thereof. If we had any disruption, say from a conflict, not even necessarily that we're directly involved with, but like we're experiencing now, the slightest disruption and shipping is such, shipping and ports is just such an enabler, and without it, forget about even making money off it. It's just we become completely disabled. But they had the strategic ports policy. They're going the opposite direction here in Queensland, actually stopping anything more being built, and no more capital dredging, which means no more new dredging anywhere. We're going backwards.
I know, it's crazy. And then, of course, the Queensland government then caused more problems because the old fleet up there of Sea Swift vessels, you know, they sell it to QIC, which is really the government. And and I think the average age of the Sea Swift fleet is about 33 years old. and most of the vessels should be actually here in the Queensland Maritime Museum in Brisbane. But they should have expanded not only the ports but renewed all the vessel into modern roll-on, roll-off things. And as you know, I've been pushing roll-on, roll-off around the country.
Yeah, you got some great slides there.
For a long time, we're killing 1,300 people on the coastal highway every year.
Yep.
We're seriously injuring 18,000 a year, and that's a bigger cost to the community because you end up pushing relatives around in wheelchairs and stuff like that for the rest of their life. Yep. But then the road congestion, which everyone's complaining about, road pollution, all of that is $50 billion a year. And if they use the blue highway, which doesn't require potholing, they could save at least $25 billion a year. And all they need is some big car parks at strategic places. And, join all of the coastal places and do what Europe does, because if you want to drive south, say for instance from the Gold Coast, there should be 3 ships heading south every day, and there should be 3 ships heading north, and that's the European model, motorways of the sea.
Yep.
And you can take a motorhome on there, or a motorbike, or a truck, and take a cabin, or if you want to just sit in the bar, no worries.
And canals and ports were a recipe for the expansion of the United States, weren't they?
Yes, exactly right. And everyone was into canals in Europe and China 200 years ago, 150 to 200 years ago. We only did it in one. That was the extension of the Murray River, which we extended up to 36 meters above sea level. But if we did the same on the Albert River coming past Burtown and kept dredging and building a canal, we actually can get down to Gregory Downs at 36 meters above sea level. And that's the gateway of 2.8 billion tons of phosphate and all sorts of other goodies that presently is a trapped resource.
Stuart, you were talking about Hagar the Horrible before, didn't you? He could have been one of the potential buyers of your design, didn't you? You've sold boats designs into in Scandinavian countries there, haven't you? Was it Holland or Denmark?
Yes, no, I've sold into Holland.
Yeah.
And the Dutch, they object.
Not too many Australian ship designers would have sold designs into Holland, I imagine.
That's right. No, they had a mental block about it first. They said, listen, we were building ships in Holland before Australia was founded, and here you are trying to sell us a design. I said, yeah, but our designs are much better than yours, And so they bought 2 designs from us, which is running in the northern part of Holland out to the Terschelling and Vlieland Islands, So.
Well, Stuart, it's been a pleasure talking to you. When KAP gets some more power and influence in the state government here in Queensland, we're going to be drawing on your consultancy, your knowledge to help us build these things and create some future prosperity for our kids and grandkids. So I appreciate everything.
Robbie, as soon as you secede, I will move up there. As soon as you secede.
Well, we don't wait for that. We've got to move before that. It's about we want to cart everyone along with us, Stuart, all through Queensland, all through Australia. Right. And so thanks very much for coming on, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Robbie.
Talk soon.